The Norwegian group Darkthrone is a band that's been around for quite some time now, starting out playing death metal in the late 80s, with that sound being on full display on the debut album Soulside Journey. Then they adopted a more black metal sound in a similar vein, such as Bathory and Celtic Frost in the early 90s, with their albums A Blaze in the Northern Sky, Under a Funeral Moon, and Transylvanian Hunger being considered classics in the genre, dubbed the Unholy Trinity. Nowadays, Darkthrone has combined the minimalistic lo-fi sound of black metal with the more dirty, chaotic sound of punk and thrash metal, similar to groups such as Motorhead or Venom. On Old Star, the duo follows this pretty consistently, as Fenriz is pounding the drums very primally, and Nocturnal Culto is covering the bass and guitar riffing, as well as grunting and snarling out the lyrics with vigor. The album starts off with the track I Muffle Your Inner Choir, wasting no time as it erupts in thrashy riffing, complemented by a production value that has a considerable amount of grit to it, while still allowing you to distinguish what notes are being played. At about halfway through the track, we get this really cool halftime feel change, featuring a much sludgier riff, which is just absolutely perfect for headbanging. We are then finally reintroduced to the beginning riff, returning us to the original tempo, while it builds in intensity until it reaches a perfectly chaotic climax, filled with noise and distortion. The following track, The Hardship of the Scots, inverts the formula we heard previously, as we start in a more mid-tempo groove, speed up in the middle section, and return back to that groove at the very end. However, that's not to say that the two tracks are entirely identical to one another, as The Hardship of the Scots does have its own characteristics and differentiates itself. For example, we are introduced to a very tasty guitar lead about 2 minutes in that complements the mid-tempo groove quite nicely. And as well, the faster middle section also includes a very transcendental, almost eerie riff in the new tempo as sort of a palate cleanse from all that we've heard. And because of this, it's probably one of my favorite songs off the record. We are then introduced to the title track, which features a more minimalistic, atmospheric style of riffing, drawing more influence from their black metal side than the more straightforward thrash punk sound on the first couple of tracks. Fenriz's drumming is absolutely marvelous in this track, as it switches from a fairly meat and potatoes metal style drumming with a more tribal sounding drum part. Then after the title track, we are introduced to another one of my personal highlights from this record, called Alpman. This is probably one of my favorite tracks off this record, because it's filled with some of the most heaviest, most absolutely headbang-worthy riffs that honestly would not be out of place on a Candlemass or a Cathedral record. The vocal passage in the first minute or so follows the intro riff quite well in my opinion, and the ending guitar solo does one of my absolute favorite things, as it follows the main riff a couple of times, and then towards the end of it deviates into several great turnarounds, doing its own thing, and it's honestly quite stellar. We're then thrust back into the black metal punk thrash crossover that we heard on the first couple of tracks on this LP, with the song Duke of Gloat. It pretty much goes off without a hitch, not doing really anything that's surprising, but still sounding very good. Although I do admit it does have a very, very good moody section in the middle with lots of eerie chord changes and a very beautiful melodic solo to boast as well. Although immediately after we are reintroduced back to the main riff of this thing, while I do like it, does kind of leave me a little bit hanging. We're then greeted with the finale of this album, the track The Key is Inside the Wall. It has a considerable amount of build-up to it, filled with loads of guitar static and cymbal crashes until the opening doomy riff reveals itself, then transitioning to a more straightforward thrash metal riff. The two riffs contrast with each other quite well in my opinion, as they play off of each other for some time until we are met with this ominous, demonic-sounding spoken word passage, which I would assume is delivered by Nocturnal Culto, but you can correct me if I'm wrong. This vocal passage then melds into this moody breakdown, which is fitted with another great melodic guitar lead that, while is not too terribly complex, has a quite hypnotizing effect, and honestly, I love it to death. Overall, I would say that this is another good album to be put into the extremely solid Darkthrone discography, as I really didn't find any track that I would say I personally disliked or that I felt was not up to the same standard that the other tracks that were. That being said, though, I do have a couple of complaints with the record, as I felt that the track The Duke of Gloat was a little too generic, and that the album seemed to end a little too abruptly, kind of leaving me hanging, not really that satisfied. I just wanted a little bit more out of this record. However, these issues aren't really that big of a deal. They're not deal breakers in my book. And I would highly recommend giving this album a listen, especially if you're a fan of Darkthrone or just black metal in general. Overall, I would probably rate this album an 8.5 out of 10.